its imagination of queerness. I'll begin with a studio, with an independent production, Ziba Khana, which was a slasher film that came out in 2007. And then I'll move on to studio-produced, more mainstream Pakistani films and how the construction of queerness, or queer identities, varies across these various visual cultures in Pakistan. So, beginning with Ziba Khana. Now, why did I choose Ziba Khana? Because it's one of those contemporary films that head-on deals with queer character, and here in this film, it's Baby who's the monster killer of this film. And now it's the demand of the genre of the slasher film that you have 5 friends who go off into the wilderness and then get killed off one by one. They're getting killed off by a burqa-wearing, mace-wielding Hijra, which is, I mean, in terms of the history of Pakistani cinema or visual culture broadly, is frankly unprecedented. So hence I chose this film. The way I'm going to read this film is that it shows a vision of a queer anarcho revolution that is very working class, and it reimagines queerness from passive suffering to aggression, to violence and aggression and ballistic eroticism. Baby is a side of queer eroticism. Baby is a side of rural aggression. Baby is a side of anti-urban vengeance. So, and her family includes her mother, and they have collectively ousted or killed off the patriarch. So, now this film was made by Umar Ali Khan, who's a cultist, who's a cinephile, who knows the genre pretty well, who when he made this film, he was borrowing from several Western tropes. So this film is not, I won't call it an adaptation of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it is borrowing heavily from it. So in your predominant slasher, the family is predominantly male. But here in Ziba Khana, the patriarch has been annihilated. He's reduced to a skeleton in the closet. So, ironically, in the closet. So, this entire community functions as a queer, aggressive queer network that is out to get the urban heteronormative strays who wander off into the wilderness. Now, so I'll begin with Jessica Henchey's paper where she traces the history of the Hijras in South Asia and how it was only with the British Raj and with the Criminal Tribes Act in the late 19th century that Hijras and transvestites and cross-dressers were criminalized, and their presence was minimized by the British colonization, the British colonial authorities. So the fact that Baby then, in 2007, this film is presenting a post-colonial response to colonial anxieties regarding genders and sexualities that are non-mappable within the colonial system. So in this film, Baby and her family, they feed on your urban, cishet identities for sustenance. They don't just kill them, they feed on them. So their cannibalism is a form of not only queer desire, but it's also a form of their physical sustenance. And the fact that she wears a burqa. Now again, it's a demand of the genre that your monster killer has to have a vague gender identity, but being a locally grounded film, the burqa covered in blood makes it erotic. And I'm drawing from the work of Carol J. Glover, who in her writings on the slasher film, talks about the garment of the monster killer, how the garment of the monster killer is a side of erotic expression, how violence for this monster killer becomes a replacement for sex. So the burqa in Ziba Khana becomes a side of violent eroticism. Also, this film has zombies, interestingly. These zombies were, how the film sees them, these are the people who are located outside of the city. These are the people located outside of the metropolis, the Pakistani metropolis. And because of increasing urban development, because of pollution, these people have been transformed into zombie-like creatures. But not just zombies, but these zombies are out there to get blood. These zombies are out there to kill and hunt. So again, you have a working class vision of what a revolution could look like. That's coming from the rural side. That's coming from outside the city. Now later on, there's a moment in the film where baby's mother, who's killed off her husband and who lives with her daughter, and addresses her as her beti, as her daughter. Talks about the construction of the M2 motorway in Pakistan and how the construction isolated them and their neighbors from the rest of the cities, and how the Kaum wale, now this is a phrase used, how the Kaum wale have forgotten people like her. So if they are Kaum wale, if they are citizens, if they are normative citizens, what does that make her and her family? So Zibahana imagines queerness as these queer identities as those who refuse citizenship altogether, not just refuse citizenship altogether, but are an active threat to normative citizenry. I'm drawing upon Amy Bransell's work, who writes that queer and citizen are antithetical concepts. So here in this film, queerness is anti-urban, queerness is violent and aggressive, and queerness is also also anti-citizenship altogether. So these identities are not peaceful assimilationist coexistence with the nation state as we have in Pakistani cinematic representation will show hijras as part of the city's spectacle, as those who are reduced to comic relief in films, who are reduced to who are made fun of and who are there just to be laughed at. Here we have representation of queerness that is aggressive and threatening and scary. And how is this film different from or is doing something different in Pakistani cinematic history, is that previously, and I'm now talking about Kamran Qureshi's early telefilms in the 90s, these films and the film like Bol, again Shoaib Mansoor's very recent film it's a studio-produced film, pretty mainstream. It was funded by the USAID. So this film its primary function was to create awareness regarding the rights of minorities. Now, what this film is getting wrong, and what Kamran Qureshi's films are getting wrong, is that they have been made in the tradition of in a colonial tradition of reducing the Hijra identity to that of eunuchs. Now, Hinchi has already told us that it was only with the Criminal Tribes Act that Hijra groups were branded as eunuchs, and calling them eunuchs or naming them eunuchs reduces the heterogeneity that is present between Hijra groups in Pakistan. So the queer protagonists in these films are passive, they suffer with dignity, and then they eventually die. In Bol, the main character, Saifi, who's a trans woman, is killed off halfway into the film and does not even make it to the film poster. He's so irrelevant that he doesn't even come to he has made it to the film poster. So the fact that these films, the studio-produced films endorsed by funding agencies in Pakistan, have stuck to this picture of the Hijra as that who suffers and doesn't fight back, is challenged by Zibahana.